At dawn, the Navy base was quiet, only the sound of wheels from a janitor's cart echoing between walls lined with medals and rank. No one paused to notice him, except a little girl who waited by the gate and called him Daddy. One afternoon, a proud SEAL Admiral turned him into a joke before the entire mess hall, smirking as he asked, "What's your call sign, Janitor?" No one expected the man with the mop to answer. The air in Coronado always smelled of salt, metal, and memory. Long before sunrise, the Pacific breeze rolled over the base, carrying the low hum of ships moored in the dark. Inside Building 17, Elias Walker moved quietly, pushing his cart through corridors bright with sterile light. His steps made almost no sound, an old habit from a life that once demanded silence to stay alive. He was tall, the kind of man whose frame still remembered discipline, though his uniform now was blue cotton instead of camouflage. His hands, rough and scarred, had once gripped the cold steel of a rifle. Now they held a mop handle worn smooth from years of use. He cleaned as others slept. The world ran better when someone unseen made sure it was spotless, and Elias had become very good at being unseen. Outside the window, the ocean blinked with dots of light from anchored ships. He stopped for a moment, letting his reflection fade into the glass. The man who looked back at him wasn't the soldier the world once cheered, just a janitor, a man who traded the roar of gunfire for the hush of empty halls. His right shoulder twitched, an old wound that never fully healed. The left ear still rang faintly from an explosion years ago. The doctors called it tinnitus. He called it a reminder. The clock on the wall read 04:27 a.m. He had half an hour before the cooks arrived, before the noise returned, before invisibility became a shield again. From his pocket, a faint vibration. He reached for his phone. A message from Lily, time-stamped 4:15. "Daddy, I slept again. I held Mommy's cup. Don't work too much, okay?" The corners of Elias's mouth softened. He typed back, "I'll be home soon, little bird. Sleep tight." That cup, the cracked porcelain one, was all that remained from the fire that had taken her mother. Lily kept it close like a relic, believing it carried luck. Elias had stopped correcting her long ago. Some faiths deserved to be left untouched. He put the phone away, exhaled, and pushed the cart toward the mess hall. The smell of early breakfast crept through the vents, coffee, bacon, and something sweet baking in the oven. It was always the same, comforting and cruel at once. He passed by a few young recruits stretching before morning drills. Their laughter bounced down the corridor. They looked clean, loud, invincible. He remembered being like that once, before war taught him that noise dies faster than silence. By 6, the base awakened fully. Voices, boots, radios, laughter. And above it all, the authority of Admiral Victor Hayes, a man who filled every room like a storm. Hayes had earned his ribbons long ago, but his pride had aged badly. He liked his stories loud, his jokes louder. That morning he entered the mess hall surrounded by younger officers, talking about his golden days in SEAL operations. Elias was wiping tables when Hayes noticed him. "Walker!" the Admiral called out, half grin, half command. "Our finest janitor. Tell me, son, how long you been polishing these floors?" Elias straightened. 4 years, sir." 4 years? Hayes raised his brows theatrically. "And before that? What was your battlefield? A hotel lobby?" A few chuckles rolled through the room. Not malicious, just the kind that grows when a superior expects you to laugh. Elias didn't. "No, sir," he said simply. "I served." The Admiral smirked. "Served, huh? Where, in sanitation? Or maybe logistics? Come on, Walker. Every man here's got a story." He turned to his audience, lowering his voice with fake camaraderie. "You think he had a call sign, boys?" The officers laughed softly. Someone muttered, "Mop man." Hayes nodded, pleased. "No, I've got it. Mop Raven. Fits the part, doesn't it?" Laughter swelled again. It bounced off the steel walls, sharp and shallow. Elias said nothing. He looked down at his mop bucket, watching the ripples settle. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost kind. "They used to call me Silent Raven." It wasn't loud, but the way he said it, calm, factual, struck harder than any shout. The laughter stopped. The older SEAL sitting at the far table froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. He stared at Elias with a sudden, haunted recognition. Slowly, almost reverently, he stood and saluted. The mess hall fell into silence. The air tightened. Even the ventilation hum seemed to dim. Hayes blinked. "What did you say?" Elias didn't answer. He wrung out the mop, lifted the bucket, and turned toward the kitchen. At that moment, Admiral Julia Morgan entered the room. The silence made her stop mid-step. Morgan was a woman whose presence quieted chaos, not by command, but by memory. The kind of calm that came from someone who had seen men die and still managed to breathe after. She took one look at the scene, then at Elias's retreating back, and something old stirred in her. A buried report flashed in her mind. SEAL Team 7, Syria, 2014. KIA, 5. MIA, 1. Call sign, Silent Raven. Her throat tightened. That one missing man, presumed dead 9 years ago, was standing there, mopping the floor. No one else understood what just happened, but they felt it. The laughter had curdled into unease. Hayes shifted his stance, his arrogance collapsing into the heavy air. He didn't know the details, but he knew enough to sense the weight of that name. Elias reached the doorway, paused, and said softly, "If you'll excuse me, Admiral, I have the kitchen to finish." Then he was gone. For a long moment, the mess hall remained frozen. Officers staring at each other, at the floor, at the place where the janitor had stood. Outside, through the open door, the first light of morning spilled across the tiles. Morgan's eyes lingered there. "Silent Raven," she whispered almost to herself. Outside, Elias walked the path toward the maintenance shed, the sea breeze cold against his face. The sun was breaking through now, a pale gold rising over the Pacific. He stopped beside the railing, watching the water catch fire. In his pocket, he still felt the folded paper Lily had drawn for him. A man with a mop and a cape, standing beside a little girl holding a broken cup. Above them, in uneven letters, "My dad. My hero." He smiled faintly. He didn't need medals or recognition. The world had taken enough already. He had Lily, and that was enough. The morning sunlight spilled over the base like a slow revelation. By the time Elias finished mopping the last hallway, the sounds of training had already begun outside. Shouts, whistles, boots slapping against the asphalt. He stepped out through the side door and inhaled the scent of the ocean, sharp and familiar, the kind that could sting the eyes without warning. He was exhausted, but not tired. Men like him didn't really sleep anymore. They just waited for the dark to pass. By the family gate, a small figure was waiting on the bench. Lily, legs swinging above the ground, holding a chipped porcelain cup between both hands as if it were something alive. Her brown hair caught the light, and her small backpack sat beside her feet, covered in cartoon stickers that had begun to peel. When she saw him, Her face brightened in that rare, fragile way that made the entire world worth enduring. "Daddy," she called. Elias smiled, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked over. "Morning, little bird." She held up the cup proudly. "I brought Mommy's cup again. It's lucky." He crouched to meet her eyes. "You know it's cracked, right? If it breaks, we can't fix it." Her lower lip trembled just slightly. "But it's Mommy's. She drank tea from it every morning before you went away. If I bring it, she'll stay with us." Elias looked at the hairline fracture running across the cup, a thin white scar under the sunlight. For a moment, he saw not porcelain, but skin burned, walls falling. The fire eating everything except this one small thing. He nodded softly. "Okay, but promise me you'll hold it carefully." "I will," she said quickly, hugging it to her chest. She was 8, but her eyes sometimes looked older than his. That was what guilt did. It aged everyone it touched. They sat on the bench for a while, watching the flags ripple in the wind. Around them, other families passed, wives, husbands, children, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes. None of them seemed to notice the janitor sitting among them. Elias didn't mind. He had spent a lifetime learning that dignity didn't need witnesses. "Daddy," Lily said after a while, "did they still laugh at you?" He turned. "Who told you that?" She shrugged, looking down at the cup. "Someone at the daycare said their daddy saw you cleaning the mess hall and people laughed. They said janitors don't have medals." For a moment, Elias said nothing. The wind tugged at his sleeve, and somewhere across the base a whistle blew, long and sharp. "Do you think it's funny to clean, Lily?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No." "Do you think it's funny to make something better than you found it?" She looked up. "No, I think that's good." Elias smiled faintly. "Then maybe they don't understand. Some people forget that the hardest thing in the world isn't to fight. It's to rebuild." Lily nodded slowly, though the thought was too big for her to hold. She traced her finger along the cup's crack, whispering, "Mommy said things that break can still be beautiful." "She was right," Elias murmured. "Broken doesn't mean useless. It means it survived." He placed a hand gently over hers, steadying the cup between their fingers. The sunlight refracted through the porcelain, casting a thin gold line across her wrist. A scar of light. A few steps away, Admiral Julia Morgan stood by the fence, her uniform jacket slung over her arm. She hadn't meant to linger, but the sight of the two held her in place. Something about the way Elias bent his head toward the child, slow, deliberate, protective, made the air tighten in her chest. She had read about him the night before, after that strange incident in the mess hall. The old personnel archives had to be unlocked through 3 levels of clearance. There, buried beneath years of classified dust, she had found his name. Walker Elias. SEAL Team 7. Status: missing, presumed KIA. She had stared at the screen for a long time. Now she was staring at him. He looked nothing like the photo from 2013. The file showed a younger man with alert eyes and a quiet defiance in his stance. The man on the bench was older, steadier, like someone who had outlived the storm but never left its edge. Morgan watched as Lily dropped something, a piece of bread, and Elias crouched instantly, picking it up before it hit the dirt. He smiled at the child again, the kind of smile that forgave the whole world without asking anything back. Morgan felt a strange pull in her chest, part grief, part respect, part something unspoken that didn't belong in a uniform. She turned away before they noticed. Inside the mess hall, Admiral Hayes sat at his desk, rereading the morning report with a restless frown. He'd spent half the night trying to shake the unease that name had left in his mind. Silent Raven. It had been a ghost story whispered through SEAL corridors years ago, a mission gone wrong in Syria, a man who disappeared in the chaos, whose radio silence had confused both sides of the battlefield. The rumor said he'd stayed behind to hold off a militia column, buying his team enough time to evacuate. No body had ever been found. Hayes rubbed his temples, feeling a rare thing for a man like him: regret. Maybe the joke had gone too far. Maybe it hadn't been a joke at all. By afternoon, Elias was back on duty. Lily stayed in the small family room near the kitchen, a privilege Julia Morgan had quietly arranged after hearing about the incident. The girl drew on white napkins with colored pencils. Every few minutes, she would peek out the door to see if her father was still there. That was when another boy, the son of a logistics officer, ran by, tripped, and knocked into her. The cup flew from Lily's hands and shattered on the floor. For a second, she froze. Then came the tears. Not the loud kind, but the trembling, wounded ones that came from the deepest place of loss. "Don't call my daddy a coward!" she screamed suddenly, though no one had said it. Her voice echoed down the hallway like something breaking twice. Elias was there in seconds. He knelt beside her, gathering the shards carefully. The boy had already run off, scared of what he'd done. The floor glittered with porcelain and sunlight. Elias touched his daughter's shoulder. Hey, look at me." Through her tears, she did. "It's okay," he whispered. "It's just a cup." "But it was Mommy's." He nodded. "I know. But even broken things can be fixed. See these lines?" He held up a piece. "They'll hold glue. And maybe when it's mended, it'll be even stronger. That's how people are too." Lily sobbed harder, clinging to his neck. He wrapped his arms around her and let her cry until her small body softened against him. Behind them, Admiral Morgan appeared silently in the doorway. She said nothing, just watched. And in that stillness, she saw the discipline of a soldier and the tenderness of a father merging into something far rarer: peace. That night, after he put Lily to bed, Elias sat outside their small apartment. The broken cup lay on the table beside him, its pieces drying under the moonlight. He ran a finger along one of the cracks, tracing it like a scar he could understand. Before dawn, he mended it himself, careful glue along every fracture, slow, patient, the way he'd patched his own life. By morning, thin golden seams held the cup together, visible but proud. From the distance came the hum of patrol boats and the cry of a gull, the same sound every night, the sound of a world that moved on, indifferent and infinite. Elias leaned back, eyes half closed, whispering to the dark. Things that break can be mended. People, too. He didn't notice Admiral Morgan standing a few meters away, her hands in her pockets, watching. For the first time in years, she smiled, faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if the base itself had taken its first quiet breath in a decade. The wind off the Pacific carried a chill that morning, one that found its way through every open vent and window on the base. It smelled of metal and brine, like the taste of memory itself. Inside her office, Admiral Julia Morgan stood alone, staring at the classified file projected on her screen. The file name was simple: Walker Elias, SEAL Team 7, status MIA, Operation Halberd, Syria, 2014. The cursor blinked beside the final line of the report: presumed dead. Yet the man who mopped her corridors every morning was alive. Julia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. For years, she'd told herself that ghosts belonged to other people, that loss was a tax every commander paid, and hers had simply been collected earlier than most. But now one of those ghosts was back, quietly polishing her floors. She zoomed in on the attached photo. Elias Walker, 30, short hair, unreadable expression. There was something unsettling about his eyes even then. Calm, distant, like someone who'd already accepted the cost of silence. Her mind drifted back to the report's summary. She had read it twice already, but still her throat tightened as she reached the same lines. Team compromised at 0430 hours. Heavy fire. Extraction failed. Radio silence from unit lead. Call sign, Silent Raven. Last known transmission, I'll hold them. Julia closed her eyes. She remembered that night. She'd been in the command center, headset on, listening to static bleed through the comms. The silence that followed was longer than any explosion. For 9 years, that name, Silent Raven, had existed only in the role of the dead. Down below, Elias was in the storage wing, repairing a leaking pipe. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbow, and his arms bore the marks of both war and work, one set of scars made by fire, the other by time. He worked methodically, without hurry. The wrench turned, the drip stopped, the sound of water ceased. It was a small victory, but victory nonetheless. The maintenance supervisor walked in. "Walker, Admiral Morgan wants to see you. Office 302. Elias nodded, wiping his hands. Understood. Julia was standing by the window when he arrived. Morning light reflected off the ocean beyond, breaking into fractured beams across the glass. "Ma'am," he greeted quietly. "Come in, Walker," she said. Her tone was even, but something in her voice wavered beneath the command. He stepped forward, hands folded loosely behind his back. Years of instinct never left you, not even when your rank did. Julia turned. "You know why I called you?" "I imagine you've seen the file," he replied. His eyes stayed on the horizon beyond her window. "I have," she said. "You were reported missing. Presumed dead." Elias gave a small nod. That part wasn't wrong. She studied his face. "What happened out there?" He hesitated. When he finally spoke, his words were simple, but each one seemed to carry the weight of the years he had never spoken about. "We were in the Al-Qaryatayn sector. Intel was bad. They knew we were coming." He paused. "By the time I realized it, the team was surrounded. Radio was jammed. We tried to push through, but..." He stopped, the silence filling in what language couldn't. Julia waited. Not as an admiral, but as someone who had buried too many names. "I sent the others ahead," Elias continued quietly. "Told them I'd cover the rear. Bought them 12 minutes, long enough for air support to find a corridor." He looked down at his hands. "When they pulled out, I stayed. Took a round in the shoulder, shrapnel in the leg, lost my weapon, crawled through a drainage tunnel for 2 days before a local farmer found me." "You were captured?" "For a while," he said. "A militia group. They thought I was CIA. I let them." He almost smiled, but it was the kind of smile born from exhaustion, not humor. 2 months later, they were hit by a rival faction. I used the chaos to get out, walked north at night, hid during the day, found a UN convoy near Raqqa. They didn't believe I was who I said I was. No papers, no tag, half deaf, half alive. By the time I got back stateside, my name was already on the wall. Julia exhaled slowly. "And you never came forward?" He looked at her then, eyes steady, voice even. "There was nothing left to come back to, Admiral. My wife died in the fire 3 months before my return. Lily barely survived. The military sent a folded flag and a letter to a woman already gone. I wasn't needed as a soldier anymore. The quiet in the room deepened. Julia whispered, "So, you became a janitor?" "I became a father," Elias corrected. Cleaning floors was just the only job that kept me close to her. Julia turned away, her throat thick. She stared at the framed photo on her shelf, a man in uniform, smiling in desert light, her husband, dead in the same war. For a moment, the weight of their shared silence hung between them, two soldiers who had both survived too much, too quietly. She said finally, "You know, they still talk about that mission in briefings, the one they never name. They say Silent Raven held the line long enough to save an entire task force." Elias shook his head. "They remember the noise, not the cost." There was nothing to say after that. Julia nodded once, a gesture not of command but of respect. "You should have come to me earlier." He gave a tired smile. Some ghosts aren't meant to salute the living. When he left, the room felt different. Not emptier, but awake. Julia stood there, staring at the door, her hand unconsciously brushing the wedding band she still wore. Outside, she could see Lily waiting by the fence, waving a paper crane in the air. Elias crouched to meet her, his laugh barely audible through the glass. And something in Julia's chest, something long frozen, shifted. That night, as the base lights dimmed, she reopened his file one last time. Her fingers hovered over the words "presumed dead," then pressed edit. A single line replaced it. Status returned. Silent Raven has come home. She hit save and closed the terminal. Night had long since folded over Coronado. The ocean lay dark and motionless beyond the floodlights, and the air carried that faint metallic chill of coming rain. Inside her office, Admiral Julia Morgan sat alone, staring at the framed photograph of her late husband, Captain Richard Morgan, the man who had died in the same region where Silent Raven disappeared. She had thought she'd buried that part of her life, but meeting Elias Walker had unburied everything. The incident in the mess hall earlier that day had spread through the base like a quiet storm. No one spoke openly, but everyone knew. Even the youngest recruits, who hadn't yet been born when Walker went missing, now whispered his call sign as if it were a prayer. Silent Raven. Morgan set the photo aside and opened the small folder on her desk. Inside were fragments, an after-action report, a list of casualties, and a single letter she had written years ago to a widow who never lived to read it, Rachel Walker. She read it now under the dim light of her desk lamp. The words felt like rusted metal, heavy, corroded by time. Your husband, Commander Elias Walker, demonstrated exceptional valor. His actions saved multiple lives at the cost of his own. You have our nation's deepest gratitude. A lie written in official language, a convenient silence disguised as honor. She closed the folder. Down the hill, the janitor's quarters were quiet. Elias sat outside his small apartment, the glow from inside faint and warm. Through the window, he could see Lily asleep, her small body curled around the patched-up porcelain cup. The cracks shone faintly where the glue had dried. The cup had survived, just like them. The wind lifted his hair as he looked out at the horizon. The waves rolled in like long breaths, steady and eternal. He had spent most of his life listening to sounds like these, things that never stopped, no matter what you lost. He didn't hear the footsteps until she was almost beside him. "Permission to sit?" Morgan asked. He nodded. "You don't need permission, Admiral." She sat on the step beside him, their shoulders almost touching, though neither looked at the other for a long time. The night hummed with the low throb of ships idling in the bay. "You were right," she said finally. "War doesn't end. It just changes uniform." Elias smiled faintly. "I told you that, did I?" "You didn't have to. I saw it in your eyes. He said nothing. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Between two people who had both buried too many ghosts, silence could feel almost like prayer. Morgan looked toward Lily's window. She's beautiful. She's tougher than she looks, Elias said softly. The fire took everything from her. Her mother, her home, her sleep. She used to wake up screaming for months. Now she just holds that cup, like it's the only thing keeping her mother real. Morgan nodded slowly. Children find rituals before they find words. He turned to her. You sound like someone who's lost, too. Her eyes softened. My husband. 2014. Same region. Maybe even the same sand. Elias looked down. I remember hearing his call sign on comms once. Falcon. He was a good man. You knew him? She asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. He was 3 clicks east when our op went bad. I never saw him again. Morgan's throat tightened. He died 3 days later. I know, Elias said. He was trying to reach us. The two of them sat in the long quiet that followed, the kind that only comes when two people realize they've been standing on opposite ends of the same wound. After a while, Morgan spoke again. When you came back, why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Elias thought for a long moment before answering. Because the only person who mattered was gone. Rachel. She died thinking I was a hero. I couldn't take that from her. Morgan looked at him, really looked, and saw not the janitor, not the soldier, but the man who had chosen to carry his pain quietly so others could keep their illusions intact. That's not cowardice, she said softly. That's mercy. He smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how close those two can look. She shifted, elbows resting on her knees. You ever think about going back into service? Even just advisory? He shook his head. I've done my part. My mission now is her. He nodded toward Lily's window. I'm not leaving her alone in this world. Morgan's voice was almost a whisper. You already gave her more than medals ever could. Elias chuckled quietly. A father with a mop and a broken shoulder? A father who came home, she said. That's rarer than you think. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the ocean, breathing slow and deep. Morgan's tone softened, more personal now. You know, I read your report. The real one, not the version they filed. They said you went back into the fire to pull out a civilian boy. Is that true? Elias's jaw tightened. He was 13. Got caught in crossfire. My men told me to leave him. I couldn't. He looked like Lily. He paused. That's why I stayed behind. That's why my radio went dead. Morgan blinked back something that wasn't just admiration. You saved a child. He exhaled slowly. Maybe. I don't even know if he survived, but that day it stopped being about countries or sides. It was just a kid screaming for his mother, and I'd heard that sound before. The wind shifted. The base lights glowed faintly over the water. Morgan felt her throat close with emotion. There were no words fit for what he had done, because some truths didn't belong in citations. They belonged in silence. She rose to leave, then hesitated. Elias. He looked up. You said once that you didn't come back for recognition, she said. So why stay here? Why this base? He looked out at the dark horizon. Because every morning, when I hear the flag go up, I remember the men who can't. And because this is where she'll grow up, in a place that reminds her what integrity looks like. Morgan's gaze lingered on him, lit by the faint silver of moonlight. You're the kind of man this country forgets too easily. Elias smiled, small and tired. That's fine. I didn't live to be remembered. She nodded, eyes glassy. No, she whispered. But maybe you lived to remind the rest of us what matters. They stood there for a long time, side by side, two shadows against the wind. Later that night, as Morgan walked back to her quarters, she looked up at the stars, the same stars that had once shone over Syria. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone under them. Somewhere behind her, a quiet man was tucking his daughter in, and somehow that made the universe gentler. Inside his room, Elias folded a small note and placed it beside Lily's bed. It read, "If you ever feel afraid, remember, courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to love anyway." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, kissed her temple, and turned off the lamp. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, patient, cleansing. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It drummed against the roofs of Coronado, washing salt off the walls, blurring the line between sea and sky. Every morning, Elias Walker woke to the same rhythm, soft, steady, like the world trying to whisper something only he could understand. But sleep never came easy anymore. Not for him, and not for Lily. It started with small things, a flinch at thunder, a whimper when the fire alarm buzzed during maintenance checks. But by the end of the week, she refused to turn off the nightlight. She said darkness felt like smoke. That night, Elias woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years, the kind of scream that came from the middle of a dream, where the air itself burned. He was beside her bed in seconds. Hey, it's all right," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. Her body trembled violently. "You're safe. Daddy's here." "I saw it again," she sobbed. "The fire. You were inside it." Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her it wasn't real, but the truth was, it had been once. He had been inside that fire. He had run through it, choking on smoke, when the roof came down and Rachel's scream vanished into the roar. He stroked Lily's hair. "That's over now, little bird. It's gone." She clung tighter. "It's never gone." He said nothing, because she was right. The next morning, Admiral Julia Morgan found him outside the maintenance shed, sitting on an overturned crate, eyes hollowed by fatigue. He was drinking black coffee from a dented thermos, staring at the rain pooling in the cracks of the concrete. "You didn't sleep," she said. He gave a tired smile. "You should tell that to my daughter." Morgan hesitated. "Nightmares again?" He nodded. "She says she keeps hearing alarms, seeing fire, smelling it." "Trauma repetition," Morgan said quietly. "Children replay pain through senses. It's not the images that haunt them. It's the sound, the smell, the heat." He looked up at her. "You sound like you've seen it before." She sighed, glancing toward the horizon. "My husband's niece. Lost her father in an air crash. Drew planes burning for months. I couldn't stop her. I could only sit beside her while she drew." Elias nodded slowly. "I sit beside Lily, too. Sometimes she doesn't want to talk. She just wants silence." "Then give her that," Morgan said gently. "Silence is where healing starts." That afternoon, she brought over a small box of art supplies, paper, crayons, colored pencils. "A gift," she told Lily with a smile. "For when you can't say what you feel." Lily looked at the box suspiciously. "Will it stop the dreams?" Morgan crouched down to her level. "No, but it can help you see them differently. Lily tilted her head. Like magic? Like courage, Morgan said. For the next few evenings, Elias watched from the doorway as Lily drew. Not rainbows or animals like other children, but scenes filled with smoke and light. In one picture, there was a dark house and a small girl holding a cup. In another, a bird with one wing burned, flying toward the sun. When he asked what the bird was, she said, "It's you." "Why's the wing hurt?" he asked. "So you don't forget." He stared at her for a long time after that. Children had a way of saying truths adults spent years avoiding. Later that week, the base alarm accidentally went off during a maintenance test. The shrill metallic wail sliced through the air. In the family quarters, Lily screamed. Elias sprinted through the hallway, heart pounding. He found her crouched in the corner, hands clamped over her ears, sobbing uncontrollably. "Lily!" he shouted, dropping to his knees. "It's okay, it's just a test." She shook her head violently. "The fire's coming back, I can smell it." He pulled her into his chest, wrapping both arms around her small frame. No, it's not. It's gone. It's gone." Her breathing came in gasps. He rocked her gently, whispering until the alarm stopped. When it did, the silence felt heavier than the sound. That night, Morgan came by again. She found Elias sitting on the steps, soaked in sweat, face buried in his hands. "She had another episode," he said before she could speak. Morgan sat beside him without a word. He exhaled, trembling. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every time she hears a sound like that, she thinks it's happening again. I've tried talking, holding her, even sleeping beside her. It doesn't stop." Morgan studied him carefully. "You can't protect her from the echoes, Elias. You can only teach her what they mean." He looked at her, eyes tired and raw. "And what do they mean?" "That she's alive," she said softly. "And so are you. Every time the sound comes back, it's proof that you both made it through." Elias was quiet for a long moment, rain dripping off his hair. Then he whispered, "You ever wish it was you instead?" Her jaw tightened. "Every day." He nodded. "Me too." They sat there, two survivors trading ghosts in the rain. The next day, Lily brought her latest drawing to Morgan's office. It showed a bird with one black wing and one white, perched on a branch made of gold cracks. Morgan blinked. "That's beautiful." Lily smiled shyly. "Daddy said things that break can still be fixed. So I fixed the bird." Morgan's throat tightened. "You did, sweetheart. You really did." When Lily left, Morgan stared at the picture for a long time. The image felt holy, a child's theology of survival. That night, Elias tucked Lily into bed. She was calmer now, her breathing even. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "Yes, little bird?" "Do you still hear the loud sounds in your dreams?" He hesitated. "Sometimes." "What do you do when you hear them?" "I listen," he said. "Because sometimes if you listen long enough, you realize the noise isn't trying to hurt you. It's just trying to say something." "What's it saying?" she asked. He kissed her forehead. "That we're still here." She smiled faintly, drifting into sleep. Elias sat beside her bed for a while, watching the rise and fall of her chest, feeling the soft rhythm of a peace too fragile to name. Outside, the rain had stopped, but in the quiet after, the whole base seemed to breathe again, as if sharing one heartbeat. Morning came soft and clear after the long storm. The Pacific glittered like glass, every wave folding back into itself as if nothing violent had ever touched it. Seagulls skimmed the water near the pier, calling to each other in the same language of wind and salt that had always belonged to sailors and ghosts. At the Coronado base, the sky was unnaturally calm, the kind that always comes before change. Inside the main auditorium, flags lined the walls. Polished chairs stood in rows, filled with uniforms pressed so sharply they could cut light. The air smelled faintly of starch, brass, and reverence. Today was Memorial Day at the base, a ceremony to honor fallen SEALs. And for the first time in years, the name Silent Raven had returned to the official program. Elias Walker stood at the back of the hall, out of uniform as always, just the janitor, standing quietly in the shadow between flags. He hadn't wanted to come, but Admiral Julia Morgan had asked, and she rarely asked for anything twice. He'd brought Lily with him. She wore a small white dress and held the repaired porcelain cup in her hands. It had become her way of carrying her mother's memory into every new place. "Why are we here, Daddy?" she whispered. "To listen," he said softly, "and to remember." "Remember who?" He smiled faintly. "Everyone who didn't make it home." At the podium, Admiral Victor Hayes cleared his throat. The microphone crackled. His posture was as rigid as ever, but the usual arrogance in his stance was gone. The laughter that used to follow him no longer did. This time, the room didn't belong to him. It belonged to the silence before his words. He looked down at the paper in his hands, then at the crowd before him, and finally, his eyes found Elias, the quiet man in the back, standing beside a little girl holding a broken cup. For a moment, Hayes forgot how to speak. When he finally did, his voice was lower, uncertain, like someone learning a new language after years of shouting. "Today," he began, "we gather to remember the men who carried the weight of freedom further than most could imagine. Some came back. Some didn't." He paused. His eyes flicked again to Elias. "And some returned in ways we didn't recognize." The room held its breath. "I want to tell you about a man we once lost," Hayes continued, his voice steadying with every word. "He was known only by his call sign, Silent Raven. 9 years ago, his unit was ambushed. He stayed behind to protect his team. He was declared dead. But death, it turns out, was less stubborn than he was." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Hayes swallowed hard. "That man is here today. He wears no medals, no rank. Most days, you'll pass him without noticing. He cleans these floors we walk on. But before that, he carried his team out of hell with one arm bleeding and one ear deaf to the world. His silence saved them." He looked down, ashamed. "And I mocked him for that silence." The words hit the hall like thunder wrapped in grace. No one moved. Hayes stepped away from the podium, his throat tightening. He turned toward the back of the hall and said, voice trembling, "Commander Elias Walker, Silent Raven. If I could take back my words, I would. But I can't. So instead, I'll do what I should have done long ago." And he saluted. It wasn't a half-hearted gesture or a performance. It was slow, deliberate, and absolute, the kind of salute only a man who had learned humility could give. One by one, the others followed. Rows of sailors, officers, and Marines stood, raising their hands to their brows. The entire hall rose in silence. Elias froze where he stood. For a long moment, he didn't know what to do. Then, almost reluctantly, he set the mop handle beside the wall and stood straighter. He returned the salute, not out of pride, but out of peace. After the ceremony, the crowd dissolved into hushed conversations. Hayes approached slowly, his medals glinting under the fading light. There was no swagger left in him, only a man stripped of rank's illusions. "Walker," he said quietly, "I was wrong." Elias looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You weren't wrong about the mop, Admiral. I earned it. Hayes blinked, confused. What do you mean? Elias's tone was calm, almost kind. I traded my rifle for it. Both clean up after battles. One just leaves fewer bodies behind. For the first time, Hayes smiled. A tired, genuine thing. You should have been the one up there speaking. I did, Elias said, just not with words. Hayes nodded once more, then extended his hand. Elias hesitated before taking it. The handshake was firm, silent, final. Redemption rarely needed applause. Outside, under the open sky, the sea shimmered in sheets of silver. The ceremony had ended, but the echo of it still lingered in the air. Lily ran ahead, barefoot on the grass, her laughter soft and pure. She held the cup high like a trophy. "Daddy, look," she said. "It didn't break this time." Elias smiled, kneeling to meet her. "That's because we fixed it right." "Will it ever break again?" He brushed her hair gently. "Maybe. But if it does, we'll fix it again." That's what people do. Behind them, Admiral Morgan approached, hands clasped behind her back. "You handled that with grace," she said. "I wasn't the one who spoke." "No," Morgan replied, looking toward the auditorium. "But you were the reason everyone listened." They stood together, watching Lily chase a butterfly near the flagpole. The wind tugged at the flag above, snapping softly, not in defiance, but in memory. As the sun began to set, Morgan turned to him. "There's something you need to see." She handed him an envelope, crisp and sealed. "It's from the Department of Defense. I made a few calls. They've reinstated your honors, officially. You're not MIA anymore." Elias didn't open it. He looked at it for a long time, then handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "You can hang it in the base museum if you like." "I'm where I belong." Morgan's eyes softened. "And where's that?" He looked at Lily, running in the grass, her laughter spilling across the breeze like music. "Right here," he said. "Cleaning the floors she'll walk safely on." Morgan smiled, the kind that carried both sorrow and pride. "You've got a strange definition of peace, Walker." He nodded. "It's the only one that lasts." That night, as the stars rose over Coronado, the janitor's cart sat quietly by the dock. Elias leaned on the railing, listening to the tide. From the barracks nearby, a group of young sailors passed by. One of them stopped, saluted him silently, then kept walking. Elias didn't say a word. He didn't need to. For the first time, his silence wasn't misunderstood. It was respected. Evening draped softly over Coronado, turning the steel and salt of the base into gold. The storm had left behind a strange kind of calm, the kind that follows forgiveness. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was the quiet hum of peace trying to find its voice again. Admiral Julia Morgan stood by her kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, hair loose from its usual braid. The faint smell of stew filled the small quarters, beef, potatoes, rosemary, and the hint of garlic that always reminded her of her late husband. She hadn't cooked this meal in nearly a decade. The last time she'd made it, he'd been home for a single night before Syria called him away for good. Now, as she stirred the pot, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Elias Walker stood there in a clean shirt, collar open, holding a modest bouquet of wildflowers. Behind him, Lily peeked shyly, holding her mother's mended cup like a secret treasure. "Ma'am," Elias said softly, half smiling. "We come bearing peace offerings, though my daughter insists the flowers are hers." Morgan's lips curved. "And a fine offering they are, Miss Lily. Come in." The room was warm. a rare human kind of warmth that didn't come from heaters or lights, but from laughter that dared to return. Lily wandered the living room, eyes catching on framed photographs. Julia's husband in his uniform, a SEAL team lined up against a sunset in Iraq, and one picture of a younger Julia standing beside a man with the same crooked grin Elias sometimes had when he forgot to guard it. "Who's that?" Lily asked. Julia hesitated, then said, "That's my husband. He was a SEAL, too." Lily's small face softened. "He's in heaven with my mommy." "Right?" Julia blinked, not from surprise, but from the disarming clarity of children. "I like to think so." "Then maybe they're friends," Lily said simply, setting the cup on the table. "They don't have to be lonely." The words hit like a prayer neither adult had dared to say aloud. Dinner was simple. Bread still steaming from the oven, stew rich and fragrant, and the kind of conversation that started awkward but grew into something easy. At first, Elias ate quietly, hands resting near his bowl as if waiting for permission. It had been years since he'd been invited to anyone's table. Morgan poured him a glass of water and said, "You can stop standing at attention, Commander. You're off duty tonight." He smiled faintly. "Old habits die slower than people." "Maybe they don't have to die," she said. "Just soften." Lily giggled. "Daddy doesn't even eat fast anymore. He says slow food makes time last longer." "That's because time's the only thing I can't clean up," he teased gently, making her giggle louder. Morgan watched them both, something tender blooming behind her calm. There was a softness to Elias that military records could never capture, the gentleness of a man who had learned that strength meant not shouting back at the world, but listening to it. "You miss her," Morgan said quietly after a while. He nodded. "Every day. But it's different now. It doesn't hurt like fire anymore. It's more like..." He searched for words. "A scar that warms when it rains." Morgan exhaled. "That's how you know healing's begun." After dinner, Lily found an old chessboard on the shelf. "My daddy's good at this," she said proudly. "He beats everyone." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? I used to command strategy units. Let's see if he still remembers the art of war." Elias smiled. "Depends if you've forgotten that sometimes retreat is the surest form of victory." Lily clapped her hands. "Let's play! The loser washes the dishes." Morgan grinned. "You drive a hard bargain, young lady." They played for nearly an hour. The game wasn't really about winning. It was a slow, quiet conversation in disguise. Every move carried something unspoken. When Morgan's bishop cornered his knight, Elias said softly, "You always played to protect, didn't you?" "Always," she replied, "even when I should have attacked." When Elias sacrificed his queen to shield his rook, Morgan understood before he said it. "Still doing it," she murmured. He smiled sadly. Old habits. When Lily finally declared a draw, mostly because she was sleepy, the adults laughed, their laughter strange but freeing, like something reborn. Later, as they washed the dishes together, Morgan glanced at Elias's reflection in the window. He was drying plates, sleeves rolled up, moonlight glinting off the scar near his wrist. "I never thanked you," she said softly. "For what?" "For surviving." He looked up, met her eyes in the glass. "I didn't do it for me." "I know," she said. "But you did it. That matters." He set down the dish towel. "I think it's easier for soldiers to survive war than to survive peace." Morgan smiled faintly. "Then maybe we survive it together." By the time they left, the night had deepened into silver quiet. The air was cool, the ocean whispering beyond the dunes. Morgan walked them to the gate. Lily, already half asleep in her father's arms, clutched her cup to her chest. "She's a bright one," Morgan said softly. "She's the light that kept me alive," Elias replied. "And you?" she asked. "What keeps you now?" He looked at her, the woman who once commanded men into battle, who now stood barefoot at her own door, eyes gentler than the stars. "You," he said, then corrected himself. "This place, the quiet, the people who still remember what service means." Morgan's lips parted, but no words came. Sometimes silence said enough. After they left, she went back inside. The table still held their cups, faint traces of warmth rising from the stew bowls. She glanced at the empty seat across from hers and imagined, just for a heartbeat, that her husband sat there, smiling. And behind him, the faint echo of Silent Raven and his little girl laughing in the next room. She whispered to the empty air, "Maybe peace isn't what we find after war. Maybe it's what we share while remembering it." At their apartment, Elias tucked Lily into bed. She mumbled something in her sleep and turned over, her small hand still clutching the cup. He brushed her hair back and whispered, "You're safe now." Then he went outside, sat on the steps, and looked toward the Admiral's house in the distance, one window still glowing faintly. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't the only one awake at this hour, and for once, he didn't feel alone. Morning rose over Coronado with the hush of reverence. The rain had cleansed everything, the flags, the railings, even the old brass plaques that lined the pier. The sea was calm, stretched out like a mirror of soft blue light, and for once, the base felt at peace. It was Saturday, a rare day without drills, and the base was holding a small honor march for fallen SEALs, the kind of ceremony where names were read, bells tolled, and silence spoke louder than words. But Elias Walker had chosen not to walk between the ranks that day. He stood far from the parade square, near the edge of the dock, holding Lily's hand. She wore a small white dress again, the same one from the memorial ceremony, but today she also carried a single white rose. Her mother's cup rested beside her in the grass, sunlight sliding across its gold veins. "Daddy," she whispered, "why aren't we marching with the others?" Elias smiled gently. "Because some men salute by standing still." Down the pier, Admiral Julia Morgan noticed them from a distance. She had hoped he would join the formation, but she understood. There was something profoundly sacred about the way he stood apart. The way Silent Raven chose humility, where others chose ceremony. She watched him lift the rose from Lily's small hand and walk to the memorial wall. He knelt, pressing the flower between the carved names of his team. The letters gleamed faintly under his touch, names that still haunted his dreams, men whose voices he could still hear calling out in the desert wind. He whispered their names one by one, as if reading a prayer only he was allowed to recite. No one else could hear him, but even the sea seemed to listen. When he finished, Lily placed her cup below the wall and whispered, "Mommy's here too." Elias's throat tightened. He nodded, touching her hair. "Yes, she is." The ceremony began behind them. The bugle's slow, sorrowful note cut through the morning air. Rows of sailors lifted their hands in salute. The sound of flags snapping filled the silence between breaths. Elias didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He had stood in formations too many times before, where applause meant nothing and loss meant everything. Morgan approached quietly, her boots clicking softly against the concrete. She stopped beside him, saying nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, Her voice was a low murmur against the wind. "You could have stood in front, you know. You earned that." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "They don't need another face in a row. They need someone who remembers why they stood there in the first place." She followed his gaze.
Out beyond the docks, the sea was glinting under the sunlight like a living thing, endless, patient, forgiving. "You ever think about going back to the water?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I already did. I just didn't leave footprints." Morgan nodded. "You always speak like a man who's halfway between poetry and penance." "Maybe that's what survival sounds like." A gust of wind swept across the pier, carrying the faint scent of salt and roses. From the loudspeaker came the familiar roll call of names, each one followed by the solemn reply of a bell. When they reached his name, Commander Elias Walker, presumed MIA. The officer at the microphone hesitated. Then, clearing his throat, he corrected himself. "Returned. Present, sir." The entire crowd turned, instinctively searching for him. He didn't move. He just raised his head, one hand resting gently over Lily's. The sound of the final bell rippled out across the bay. Morgan felt tears burn behind her eyes. She had heard countless roll calls, but never one rewritten in real time. Never one that gave a ghost his name back. She whispered, "Welcome home, silent raven." After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed slowly. Some saluted him as they passed. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. The air carried no grand speeches now. Only the unspoken acknowledgement of something sacred returned. Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Can we go to the water, Daddy?" He nodded. They walked down to the shore, shoes sinking into damp sand. The tide curled around their ankles, cold but gentle. Lily crouched and dipped her fingers in. "It's freezing!" she squealed. Elias chuckled. "That's how the ocean says hello." She giggled, splashing water at him. "Then it's very friendly." He laughed, a sound that had been buried for almost a decade. And for a fleeting moment, the years between war and peace vanished. He was just a father with his daughter, standing at the edge of the world. A few meters back, Julia Morgan stood watching. She had seen countless salutes, countless tears, countless farewells. But this was different. It wasn't a man returning to glory. It was a man returning to life. She approached slowly, her shoes leaving narrow prints in the sand. "Beautiful morning?" she said. Elias looked up, smiling. "The best kind. The kind where nothing explodes." She laughed quietly. "You have a dark sense of peace." "I earned it." They both turned toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky in an infinite line. For a while, neither spoke. Then Morgan said, "You know, I used to believe the ocean only takes. But maybe it also gives back. Just not in the same form." He nodded, eyes still distant. "It gives you echoes instead of answers." "And what do you do with echoes?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You teach your daughter to listen." The tide rose higher, brushing the hem of Lily's dress. She looked at them both and said, "Can we leave Mommy's flower here, Daddy, so the sea can keep it?" He knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. The sea keeps everything." Together they set the white rose afloat. It drifted gently away, spinning once before catching the sunlight. A small, perfect motion that felt like a benediction. Morgan whispered, "The sea salutes its own." Elias said nothing. He only watched until the flower disappeared beyond the waves, his reflection merging with the sky.
That evening, as the sun melted into the water, Elias sat on the dock with Lily asleep against his arm. The repaired cup rested beside him, filled with a single shell she'd found. The wind rustled softly through the flagpoles above. Behind him, Julia Morgan's voice carried quietly. "You know, most men need medals to be remembered. You needed only silence." Elias turned, eyes calm, the dying light catching the scar along his jaw. "Silence is honest, Admiral. It doesn't ask for applause." She stepped closer, hands clasped behind her. "You've done enough, Elias. You can rest now." He looked back at the horizon. "Maybe. But rest feels too much like being gone." "Then call it staying," she said. He smiled. "That I can do." And so the sun fell, slow, patient, golden, over a base that finally knew the weight of its own peace. The last light kissed the white rose still floating far offshore, and though no one saw it but the sea, the water bowed. The summer air over Coronado had turned warm and honey-colored. The waves whispered in low rhythm against the docks, and the smell of salt and machine oil hung softly over the base, a mixture that had always meant home to Elias Walker. He stood alone by the pier that morning, his mop leaning against the railing beside him, the wind brushing through his graying hair. The world had begun to move on again. Drills resumed, engines roared, recruits shouted across the yard. But something inside him had begun to slow. The cough had come first, light, occasional, then deeper, more persistent. The doctor on base had been gentle but honest. "It's the lungs, Mr. Walker. The old scars from the desert chemicals. They've turned on you. 6 months, maybe less." He had nodded, thanked her, and walked home in silence. He'd fought worse odds before. But this battle had no enemy, only time. That night, when Lily had fallen asleep beside the window, her mended porcelain cup still glowing faintly in moonlight, Elias sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. He wrote slowly, his handwriting neat, deliberate, the way soldiers write when they know their words will outlive them. "My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means your old man finally took a longer trip than usual. Don't be sad, little bird. I've just gone where the sea sounds louder and the stars don't look so far away. You once asked me what courage means. I didn't know how to explain it then, but now I do. Courage is loving something more than your fear. It's cleaning floors when the world thinks you've fallen. It's holding on to a cracked cup because you still believe it can be whole. It's choosing to stay kind when you have every reason not to be. Don't ever let this world make you ashamed of gentleness. That's where strength truly lives. And if one day you stand by the sea and hear a bird crying above the waves, don't be afraid. That's just me, checking in. With all my love, Dad. Silent Raven. He folded the letter carefully, sealed it, and wrote Julia Morgan's name on the envelope. Then he leaned back and watched the night sway through the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a gull called. Low, soft, endless. 2 weeks later, he didn't report for duty. When Morgan found his quarters, the room was spotless. Everything folded, tools arranged, the mop leaning like a sentinel by the wall. On the desk sat the sealed envelope and the porcelain cup beside it. He had gone quietly, as he had lived. She sank into the chair, her throat tightening as she opened the letter. By the time she reached "Courage is loving something more than your fear," her tears had blurred the ink. Outside, the sea was a mirror of silver light. She stepped onto the balcony, clutching the cup in one hand, the letter in the other. And for the first time in years, she whispered a prayer. The funeral was small, just as he'd wanted. No medals, no cameras, no speeches.
only the sound of waves and the hiss of wind through the flags. Lily stood beside Admiral Morgan, her tiny hand clutching the letter now enclosed in a plastic sleeve. Her hair blew wildly, sunlight catching the tears that clung to her lashes. Morgan knelt beside her. "He wanted you to have something." She handed the girl a small wooden box, smooth and warm. Inside was a dog tag, the name etched deep. Elias Walker, Silent Raven. Lily traced the letters with her fingers. "It's heavy," she whispered. Morgan smiled faintly. So was he. The honor guard fired 3 rounds into the sky. Each echo rolled out to sea, dissolving into the horizon. After everyone left, Morgan and Lily stayed. They stood by the dock where Elias had always worked, watching the sun begin its slow descent. Lily held the cup close to her chest, her small voice trembling. "He said he'd come back as a bird." Morgan looked up. And there, gliding across the orange-gold sky, was a lone black raven, wings stretched wide, cutting through the last light of day. It circled once, twice, then vanished into the glow of the setting sun. Morgan whispered, "He kept his word." Years later, the Coronado base would hang a small framed plaque above the mess hall doorway. It wasn't grand or gilded, just a simple engraving, beside an old photograph of a man in a blue janitor's uniform, standing beside a mop. They mocked the silence. Then they learned to salute it. In honor of Commander Elias Walker, Silent Raven. Every morning recruits passed beneath it without knowing much about the man. But sometimes, late at night, the cleaning crews swore they heard a quiet voice in the hallways, humming an old Navy hymn. And outside, over the ocean, a single raven perched on the flagpole, staring toward the dawn. In time, Lily Walker grew into her father's reflection. She joined the Navy, not as a SEAL, but as a flight medic. Her call sign was Little Bird. On her uniform she wore 2 charms, a tiny piece of porcelain tied with gold thread, and her father's dog tag against her heart. Before every mission, she touched both and whispered the same words he'd written to her. "Courage is loving something more than your fear." Then she'd glance out the cockpit window, and sometimes, in the distance, a dark shape would glide alongside the horizon for a few seconds before disappearing into the clouds. She always smiled, because she knew. The Silent Raven was still watching,